Everyone went to go see. How could you not? A possible attack on a trainer. Anything to spice up a forgettable zoo trip of seeing animals lethargically move about their habitats. Now the mood has been set, let's start at the beginning of the story. When life still had a chance. At the first public feeding, a zookeeper placed a live rat into a chute that entered the serpent's lair. This rat was normal, maybe a little hungry. It landed with a soft thud after falling like thousands of other rodents have before, to their death. Sniffing the ground, almost unaware it had become the gaze of a set of eager eyes. The rat paced back and forth, searching for a way out. The pupils of the boa played an imaginary game of Pong. Watching the rat drove the boa mad with an insane hunger. Lurching itself forward with a lazy takeoff, a twig snapped in the burrow it was perched in. The rat stopped, suddenly aware of its lack of loneliness. Ears perked, twitching, searching for the source of the sonic anomaly. In a shadow, now sitting still as concrete, the overly confident predator still believed that it had food in its sights. With conviction, it slid out of its camping position. In a burst of speed it went towards the rat. Not willing to go without a fight, the rat charged itself. With a screech and a hiss, they collided into a whirling mass of murderous intent. Hearing the commotion, the trainer entered the viewing area. Surrounded by families, all watching the gladiator battle unfold in front of their faces. The trainer was shocked. Never having seen such a thing, they assured the viewing public that the snake would be victorious momentarily. That moment never came. In a sudden end, the rat grabbed the boa by the eye, gouging with its fangs. Burrowing into the skull. The snake gave a few twitches before it went still. The rat never stopped moving. It made its way around the snake, inspecting for signs of life and found none. The victorious rodent grabbed its prey by the tail and dragged it into the far recesses of the habitat. Shocked and in awe, the public made cries of disgust and amusement. None of them had ever seen such a thing. The gruesome nature of what they had witnessed had caused a few people to lose their lunches on the ground, which in turn caused others to lose theirs. The zookeeper rushed back into the exhibit to find the precious boa. The last time they were seen was pushing through the bushes that made up a facade where the snake had been planned to be able to hide behind if feeling shy. The last they were heard from was horrendous screams that encapsulated every fear known to man. My face. My fucking face. It's eating my eyes. I can't see. Help me, the bushes shaking as if an imaginary hurricane coursed through them. It's in my head. It's in my he. A thud and jolt of the bushes was the last sound heard. No doubt as to what happened went through the minds of the people watching. The moments after led to the situation becoming its most dire. A trainer, unaware of the commotion happening up front and not seeing their work peer performing their duties, made the grave mistake of placing another rat into the snake exhibit. Thinking they were doing their due diligence, picking up the slack of their nowhere to be seen or found co-worker. This rat too, landed with a soft thud and started acting out its inquisitiveness of its new environment. This time it was not met with the approach of a larger predator, but the sounds of someone familiar. A bin-mate it had known for a short time before they were whisked away by a trainer, was calling to it from deep within the bushes. Following the sounds and scents, what it found was a sight that would have caved in any sane person's skull. Laid out, as if on a buffet, was a snake and a human. Both dead, having in common that and massive skull wounds. Finding its friend engorging itself with alternating bouts of snake meat and human flesh, the two rats communicated. Realizing that the rat first placed in was a female and the other a male, it was understood between the two what must be done. They both were eating now. Fueling themselves for what would be an orgy between the two. Lathered in blood and remains, fueled by the adrenaline-enriched blood of their victims, and aware of a sense of superiority they now felt, the rodents began to copulate and produce their next wave of warriors. The zoo, for the most part, remained ignorant of the happenings of that day. Frantic guests yelled something about a massive fight in the snake cage, promptly escorted out of the park due to their frenzied nature. The zoo staff went to check for themselves. They found nothing out of the ordinary. When asking the trainer on duty, who didn't want to snitch on their peer, the trainer assured that nothing of the sort happened and that the guests must have been new to seeing snakes be fed and unaware of what happens and how ugly it can get. Confident that the resident expert would have first-hand knowledge of any such happenings, they went about their way, disregarding any possibility that anything could have been afoot at their park. A week went by. A missing persons report was filed for the trainer. Their car was found in the zoo parking lot. Enough days had gone by that old footage was replaced with new footage on the security cameras. Nothing could place them in the zoo, only at the zoo. It was thought by police that they had gotten picked up by a friend and something had then happened. They pursued those leads. Shaken by the mess the last week had been, no sightings of the new snake that the zoo had spent tons of money building a state-of-the-art exhibit for. A friend and co-worker had gone missing. The trainer remembers to maintain a sliver of hope. They think to themselves that just because the snake hasn't been seen doesn't mean all is bad, neither has the rat it was fed. With that, they proceeded to go about their pre-opening duties. The next of which was feeding the boa. As they opened the hatch of the chute and dropped the critter down the slide of death, a strong smell of death hit them in the face. Only light traveled faster across the brain of the zookeeper than the thought that their co-trainer had been killed by the boa and was hidden by the foliage in the exhibit. In a frantic rush, onset by this hemorrhaging epiphany, they entered the habitat and pushed their way to the back of the room. Tripping over the half-eaten leg of their peer, they hit the ground and back wall, knocking them into a daze. Cheek flat on the floor and with drunken eyes, they see a snake's head, preceded by a spine that led to a ball of meat where a tail would be. They also heard a rustling squeaking, and as their vision regained, they laid witness to two rats' mouths agape, rushing in on their face. A quick scream, but even more sudden stoppage. The rats had become even more violent, already navigating their way down the trainer's throat. Not yet dead, the zookeeper choked, gagged, and suffocated as the two rats made their way out of the esophagus canal by clawing through it, now exploring the still living chest cavity of this person. Only desperate attempts to grab at their stomach could be made by the trainer. Now immobile due to oxygen deprivation per a hole in their throat, but not yet brain dead, their vision became blackness as their insides were eviscerated and turned into human puree. The discovery didn't happen until the busiest weekend of the year, during the busiest time of day, while security was on break. It first heard over the keeper's radios. A screaming over the mic. Something about a snake feeding gone wrong. Curious, many families promptly left their tour and headed towards the building that housed the reptiles and snakes. Shocked to see they weren't the only ones, some people were even running. There was already a crowd making its way into the structure. Doors wide open, mass of people moving one direction. A couple trainers could be seen making their way around the back, and some broke off to mitigate the crowd entering the building. Too late. More than capacity had made their way inside, trying to find the exhibit, experiencing the chaos. More than willing to be spectators of something that broke the monotony of animal life at the zoo. A mother screamed, causing her baby to scream, as she walked past the boa constrictor habitat. She saw a rat. She had become spooked because she's terrified of the things. Drawing the mass of people's attention, it made its way over to that side of the floor. Crowding around the viewing window, attempting to see the outburst-worthy event. The door to the exhibit swung wide open. A male trainer and female trainer entered, looking worried and making disgusted faces. It looked as if they had smelled something disgusting. Pushing their way into the foliage, there was a sudden reaction to something in the bushes by the zookeepers. They jolted back, arms flailing around their head and neck, flailing at something on them. A mass of hair, a rat. Not just one, but 2, 3, 6, 20. By now, the rats overpowered their adversary and began to burrow into the face, neck, and stomach. Inhumane verbal responses to the critters racing each other to their target's core. Dropping limp and like a ragdoll, a few last shakes from the rats exiting through the holes they entered. The crowd roared in terror and confusion. Blasphemy replaced the English language for a moment. Deafening levels of hysteria, yet nobody backed away. They couldn't justify in their minds what they were seeing, but they didn't have to. Hearts racing faster than brains could process the mutilation and consequential death of two human beings, in front of their faces. It was at that moment, another keeper poked their head into the exhibit, drawing the attention of the rats, subsequently becoming their next target. In a state of perplexity, they allowed the rats to get too close. A snap was heard as the Achilles tendon was sliced by the fangs of a predaceous rodent. The trainer buckled, last seen, and heard flailing, wildly screaming for God. One by one, the crowd erupted in orgasmic fears as they witnessed 7 more people slaughtered that entered or got near what was now the rat's home via the open door. The bodies piled in a heap on the far side of the room, dragged by the dozens of rats. A man with a pistol entered the cage, managing to take out a few of the larger and several smaller rats, before he was engulfed and dealt with swiftly. Seemingly tired of the room, a single file of rats began to exit the room, revealing their numbers. There had to be 70, quite possibly double. Now out of the room. The trance the crowd was under wore off. Crying and phone calls were made. A swath of human emotions filled the room and people looked around at each other, disgusted in themselves for watching, for staying and looking for validation in their viewing partners. They hadn't done it alone. When one's to blame you can have a trial, but who's gonna judge when everybody's involved? An exclamation from the entrance set the room into madness. The rats had begun to funnel into the room. Remarks of pain and the sounds of attempts at self-defense filled the part of the room by the main entrance, while the back of the room had started to push themselves through the fire door. Unable to work together, people fighting for the open doorway slowed down the flow of people, causing a backup and people beginning to fight each other that were in the middle of the room. The rats, having exhausted what consisted of a human shield front line, began to make their way deeper into the crowd, where they began to pick people off one by one, beginning at the heel, and then the neck for a quick slash to an artery. Efficient. They managed to make a beeline to the fire door, of which a good portion had made it through, but the majority were still fighting for their life against each other inside. Soon, that exit was blocked by 3 dead bodies wedged against each other in the exit, and that became supported on the interior by more bodies. Eventually, the rats encircled the room. Nobody spared. No prejudice. Infants, children, adults. Everybody left to die as they bled out or began to be feasted on. The remaining people pushed into a corner far from both exits, clawing at each other to get further back in the group, climbing over one another as if in an obstacle course. The people became animals themselves. Trampled bodies cried in muffled gasps. They could hear their death-bringers now. Squeaks and gnashing at bodies, cries of blood-filled rage. This wasn't out of hunger. This was done out of hate. Enthralled by predatory instincts. Life that was non-rat was to be ceased. The room had fallen silent besides the scurrying and crying of the battle-tested rodents. They had more than their fill to keep breeding at an infectious rate. As if on cue, they all left the building, now chasing any survivors or ignorant zoo-goers, making their way systematically through every area of the park and eventually the areas surrounding the zoo, using the sewers to travel and breed. There was soon an army of tens of thousands murderous rats intent on eliminating every living creature on Earth. One purpose, one goal.